Hey everybody. Um, I had a lot of questions from people about how to work with props and constraining things to the character's hand. So I thought I would do a quick video to explain that. So there are several options here, and it really just depends on the needs of the animation. Like, what is the character going to be doing? So let's look at a handful of them. No pun intended. And again, no pun. Let's have our character hold a cup. In this hand. So we'll move this over here. Some of you may realize this already, but you can hold J when rotating, and that will snap it to increments of 15 degrees. And so I just want to get this cup in the character's hand. Right. I would probably, once I get it here somewhere close, we'll go ahead and name it. And then what I'm looking for is I want this control to control the cup, right? So first thing is I need to find this control in the group here, and it's pretty deep in there. So if I just hold down Shift and click plus, and then I hit F, it will find that highlighted object that I have selected, right? And so it's right there. I also need my cup. It's way down here at the bottom, and rather than lose that spot, I can actually split my outliner into two pieces here. So I got my FK wrist right there, and then on the bottom I can scroll down, find my cup. And what I could do is just simply change the hierarchy of this. I could add this cup to the rig, right? I could middle mouse drag and drop it on top of the wrist, and now it's just part of this hierarchy, right? If I move the arm, the cup is going to go with it. Again, the arm is in FK right now, so that's sort of the expectation that this is how this would work, and the cup would go with it anywhere we wanted to. And the cool part is I can animate this cup a little bit because all my values are free here. I can just move this around and position this, and if I need the cup to kind of wiggle in the character's hand, it can, right? So the problem with this is that I can't animate the hierarchy, right? I can't on frame 50 suddenly change the hierarchy of the cup to be parented under something else, right? The hierarchy is sort of a static thing that there's nothing to key when you change that, right? And so there are several other tools in Maya that we could use to make that happen. So I'm going to undo what I did here just by taking that, hitting Control Z until I get to the point where the cup wasn't in the hierarchy, right? And so now the cup is again down here. So I could use a constraint. And the way constraints work, they're under the animation menu. They're also under the rigging menu, under constrain here. We have a handful of different constraints. There are other videos on my channel that kind of talk about the basics of them. A point constraint will just control the transforms, or the translates. An orient constraint will just control the rotates. So let me sort of show you an example here. If I select the control and then the cup, and I do a point constraint, edit, reset the settings, add. So now wherever the translate is, wherever the location of this object is, of the control is, the cup will go with it, but the rotations won't, right? And a constraint works, we just get this extra node underneath here. So if I want to get rid of it, I can delete that. Right. An orient constraint does something different. If I select the cup, select the control, select the cup, hit orient constraint, it takes over the rotations of the cup, right? And so however I rotate this, it's going to match, right? But the translates won't, right? Like the translates don't match. It's so again, this is just controlling the rotations of it. Again, I'll go ahead and get rid of the constraint. And of course, it snapped it to it. I could always do a maintain offset for all of these constraints. You'll see that they have this option here to maintain the offset. So if I wanted to do that now, and check maintain offset and say add. So now the offset is maintained, but it's still sort of the same relationship, right? So there's also a parent constraint. So if point is the translates, orient is the rotates, parent is both. It's the translates and the rotates. So it's going to work very much like parenting the object underneath the control. Right? So if I select that, and you have to select it in that order, parent first, child second, and then we hit parent. So now it's going to work just like previously. Both the rotates and the translates are going to adhere to it. So here's the problem with this system. If I select a cup now, the translates and the rotates are now being controlled by that constraint, which means I can't change them. I can change them, but if I start to move my cup, they'll just snap back. And if I try to set a keyframe on them, all sorts of crazy stuff happens. We now get a new blend parent. The constraint seems to have stopped working, right? As we have some green channels, some red channels, and this blend parent is the option to blend between like we're basically giving Maya conflicting information. We're saying, I want a constraint to control the cup. And then we say, I want a keyframe to control the cup. And the blend parent is Maya just saying, pick one, right? So I could, right now, the keyframes are controlling it. If I blend this up to 1, the parent constraint will control it, right? And so that's handy, but I if I need to animate this wiggling in the hand, that still won't work for that, right? So let's undo that until we get to before we set the keyframe. And then I'll just go ahead and delete this constraint. So the workaround for this is to group this cup to itself, or to have a parent on top of that cup that can sort of take those constraint values or those constraint limitations, right? So to show you what I mean, I could just hit Control G there, and we could call this cup group. And now this is a group that will move the cup wherever we want it to, and the cup underneath it, it can be moved under it as well, right? So I've made this little tiny hierarchy here. But what I could do is grab the wrist control and the cup group and hit parent constraint. And now this is going to work the same. The group is now going to follow the wrist and take the cup with it, right? But the cup itself doesn't have any limitations, which means I can still set keyframes on it to sort of change it subtly within the character's hand, right? All right. Now, the cool things about constraints are that more than one thing can control the constraint, right? Or control the object. So let me go ahead and delete this, and we'll talk about that here in just a second and the way we can work with that. Just sort of the basics of that so you can understand it. Do a couple of boxes are. And let's just go over here and focus on these things for a minute. Let's change my background so you can see those better. There we go. So when I have this, let's say I have object A over here, object B, and object C. So what I'm wanting is object A and B to be able to control object C at different times, right? Maybe object A moves object B over and hands it off to, or object C over and hands it off to object B. There's another video on my YouTube page that kind of goes into this a little bit more elaborately. But essentially what we have is that I can just do 2 parent constraints, right? I do a parent constraint there, and you'll see that it happened, and now this object is controlling it, right? And I could do a parent constraint in that order, and now they are both controlling it 50%, right? And if I go look at this, you'll see there's these 2 weights within the input node of that constraint, and that's for object A and object B, and both of those are set to 1. So what I can do is, these are something I could animate, right? I could set the weight of object A to be 0, and now B is the only one controlling it, and A doesn't. And then I could go back and keyframe that and switch them, right? And now A is the only one controlling it, and B doesn't. Right? And so that's one way that you can have an object hand, or a character hand one object from one hand to the other. There are some sort of problems with that, but I will go back over here and we'll sort of talk about how we can deal with some of those. I'm alright with that. Let's see. Okay, I've gotten rid of the constraint on my cup. So what I did is I put mine in a group. But that doesn't, you don't have to use a group. We could also use, a locator. So if I go to create locator, and we'll call this cup parent, then I could move this locator. For those of you who haven't used locators, they're essentially just a group that you can see, right? Like there are these little nodes that are visible tick marks in the viewport, and this is really easy, or this is really handy to be able to see where the pivot point of our group is, right? And so I could get in here, and I could make the pivot point here, right? And I could freeze the transformations of this. So we'll say modify freeze transformations. And so there's my tick mark. You can kind of see it. It's kind of hiding a little bit under there, but I'm doing that so I have something visible that I can grab, and so I can sort of define where I want the pivot point of that to be. Right? And so now I can just parent my cup underneath that tick mark. And so just like before, I now have this thing that can sort of take on the pivot points, or take on the parent weights of that, right? So so here's how you could do this to allow us to blend between hands. Right? So I can select this control, then select that parent, and I'm going to go to my constraint window again. I'm going to go to parent constraint. I'm going to open up my options box here, and I'm going to uncheck that maintain offset. And that means it's going to snap that to the wrist when we're done, or when we add it. So when I add it, it's snapped to the wrist. Right? Then I can do the same thing with this control over here. Right? Select this control, select my cup parent, constrain parent, and so now it's got this argument going on. Like both wrists are trying to control it, so it's halfway between the two wrists, right? And what I can do is blend between the two. So I could just go in here to this and say, no, I want this hand to control it. And I could just sort of offset the cup with a keyframe to the palm of the hand. And so now I'm able to sort of have one hand move over here and hand it off to the other hand. Right? So we get it to here, and then just set this up where we can see it. We get it over to this point, and I can just animate that transition from 0 to 1. And I could go to let's just animate it so you can see it happening. Key selected. Maybe go. Oh, my timeline is long. Let's go just like 100 frames. There we go. And then over like 38 frames, I would set that to 1. Set that to 0. And so it offsets weird. I know I'd still have to sort of move it. But what that allows me to do is sort of, now this arm is in control of it. Right? So yeah, there's some things to do that, like this would have to have some keyframes on it as well on frame 1. Right, so let's go ahead and set keyframes there on frame 1, and then on my parent, that seems to be frame 38. I could go and let's set some keyframes on the cup as well to now be in this hand. I bet there's going to be some weird flipping that happens there. Who's up in there? Oh, yeah. So you know, we get a flip that happens in that transition. So that means I probably would just want to rotate it as well, right? For that keyframe, and then we get a weird bob up in the middle there, and that's just it shifting in time. So there's some cleanup that has to happen. There's tricks we can do to make it line up perfectly from one frame to the other. But you know, like right now this isn't bad to be switching hands. We could just make that transition happen over like 2 frames and make it happen better. You'll see. We'll see that we get this. The further away I get the hand, the more problem it's going to cause me. And so this will allow me to hand it from one hand to the other. Right? Let's go ahead and delete all those keyframes, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that constraint as well. I got my parent object there. In fact, I'm going to delete this whole cup. We're going to try something different now. So let's say I need my character to hold on to something with both hands. This is where we start getting into FK and IK. Right? You see this a lot with the character needing to hold like some form of stick. Right? So let's, whether it's a gun or a mop or whatever it is that they need to hold. Let's get something like this. So let's say they're needing to hold the stick in one hand. So rotate that a little bit more so you can see it. Or they need to hold it with both hands, right? For this, I usually pick what I think of as my dominant hand. Right? What is the hand that is going to be doing the controlling for the action, right? And then what is the hand that just kind of follows along for the ride? So let's say that for whatever reason, this is the hand that is driving it, right? Wherever this arm goes, we want the spear to go with it, or the stick to go with it. So we'll just call this stick. And I'm going to go ahead and just group the stick to itself, Control G. You should probably always be more clean about the way you group these things. Like right now, my pivot point's down there. I could, I kind of posed it before I set up this constraint. I would probably really set this constraint up in more of a bind pose or just neutrally. But this is just to get the understanding of it. So stick group, and I could just go in here with stick group and select the wrist, select stick group, and do my constraint, parent constraint. Right. Oh, sorry, let's do that again. Constrain parent. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck maintain off, or check maintain offset. And so now it just sort of stays in the local offset, right? So if I were trying to animate this arm in FK, I would have to manually try to keep it aligned every frame as it moves. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch this arm to IK. So if I go to IK, the way IK works, if you're less familiar, when I move my character, you'll see in the FK arm goes with the character. Right? The IK arm stays locked in space. And so if I hit F over here, you'll see there's my IK controller. It's actually a different controller for the hand than the FK controller. And in fact, it's usually a completely different skeleton. So that is driving it. And really what Maya is doing is blending between two skeletons that are solving for this arm. Right? So let's go ahead and put this over here somewhere and sort of put it where we would think the character would be holding the spear. For me, I always like to sort of make this a visible thing that we can see too. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, we got the hand like this, like we want it to stay constrained to the sphere. But right now it's just constrained to the world, right? So there's my control, and this character was rigged with Advanced Skeleton, so Advanced Skeleton recognizes this is something you might need to do, and there's actually an empty group node right above it called IK Extra Arm R. But not all, I'll show you how to use this, but not all rigs have this. Right? So first, if your rig does have it, it makes this easy, because this is just a group node that also will drive the IK arm. Right? So what I could do is just take the spear or the hand. Let's try it with the spear, the stick, and select the group that is above that and do constrain parent. Right? So now wherever this arm and spear goes, the IK goes with it. And the benefit of that group node is I still have the ability to animate the hand along this sphere if I wanted to go higher up the sphere or lower down the sphere, or rotate around it or something. I still have some freedom with that, right? Let's undo to before we did that though. That's it. Yeah. So not all rigs have that extra group node, and so if the one you're working with does not, we can do just selecting the spear, selecting the IK, and saying constrain parent, and it's going to work fine for it to follow. But the problem is the same with the cup earlier. Now I can't animate the arm to slide up and down the spear. So I'll undo that until that goes away. One of the things you can do is animate a new, if it doesn't have this extra group and you are worried about digging around in here and changing the rig, what you can do is actually sort of add an extra control on the spear that we could call it the arm, like the grab control or something, right? So to sort of show what I'm talking about, I could create a locator, and I could just parent that locator. We'll call this R arm grab, and I could parent that underneath the stick, and you'll see now that whatever I do with the spear, that locator goes with it, right? So I did just change some hierarchy there. Locator is there. What I would do is I would go in here. You could use some shortcuts. You'd select that and go modify, match transformations, and just match them all. Probably didn't need to match my scale. Let's just do modify, match transformations, match translates, modify, match transformations, match rotates. Why is that happening? I don't think I hit the right one. Modify, match transformations, match rotation. Apparently I did. Okay. For some reason it's putting all the scale from the spear on there as well, or from the stick as well. So I'll do just freeze my transformations. So now they're, actually that's probably not a good idea. Let's just not match my rotates perfectly. We'll just get it in there somewhere close. Oh, I know why it's doing it. Let's take it out of this hierarchy first, and then match the stick. Modify, match rotation, and then I think I can move it back underneath the stick. There we go. It was just adding the scale to the locator, no matter what we did. So what I could do is just move this here, and now like wherever I move my spear, right, that locator is going to go with it. So it's just part of the hierarchy now. So now if I constrain that directly to the control, constrain parent, I again lost the ability to animate the control, right? So I can't set any keyframes on that, but I can set keyframes on this. Right? I can like still move this around, and so I kind of just added an extra IK control, right? And all of that will still change, and this will work. Right? So this would also work if your character was carrying a box or something like that. Actually, let's just go ahead and open the scene again, so we have a new version And so I could do the same thing again. If your character needs to carry a box in front of them, I could have the FK arm be the primary arm that's carrying the box. I could switch this one to IK and have it be the primary one that's carrying the box. Another option, and I will show you why this is an option, but it's maybe not the only option you would want to think about, is that I could actually have the box be the thing that's in control. And this works best if like a character's trying to push something that isn't moving very well. Like this box were really heavy and stuck to the ground, right? And I'll show you why. Is because if I switch both of these arms to IK, I don't know why I posed them, because I just have to unpose them again. So switch both of these arms to IK and put them here. There. Right. What I could do is just grab the box, and actually let's grab this IK control, shift, expand that out, hit F. So I just grab the box, choose that group node, or create a locator, constrain parent box. So I got to find this one as well. F box group node constrain parent, and what I have now is this box controls both arms. Whatever I do with the box, those arms are going to follow along, right? And so that's a different way of thinking about it, is that like the character's carrying this heavy box. Now here's the pro and the con of this. What the character does, the box stays, right? So if you're animating your character carrying the box, and you animate your character take a step forward, you then have to animate the box, and if they're off, they'll feel disconnected a little bit, right? So what this is really for is when the box is really what is in control. Let's say the box is on the ground, and you're wanting your character to try to pick it up, and they're having difficulties picking it up, and they're like, that makes more sense. If you're just wanting your character to carry the box across the room, we can go back here. I'm going to go ahead and delete the constraint on this one. If you're wanting the character to carry the box around the room, again, I could go back to my FK arm, right, and do what we had done earlier, which is, essentially this constrain parent. Right? And so now the FK arm controls the box, and the right IK arm is going with it. And why that's beneficial is that when the character moves across the room, the box will go with them, and the character then, you can have a little bit of overlapping action as the box is has weight, but this will allow you to not feel that disconnect and have to manually animate both of them. So, I recognize that this works with a lot of different stuff, right? If I needed my character to put their hand on their head, right? Or let's let's try that. I want my character to put their hand on their head. I could, in my arm, I don't know why I'm doing this. I got to do this in IK. I go to IK. I'll put my character's hand on their head. Right, let's save this. And I want it to sort of stay aligned with their head. I could then, let's put it somewhere where it makes more sense in the pose. Something like this. Right. And when I move my character's head for the hand to kind of go with it. Again, I just find that constraint there. There's the group. And so I could select this control, that group, constrain, parent. And now when my character is like, my head hurts, right? We can have that, and I still have the ability to kind of animate the hand around, right? if you want your characters to sort of grab hands together and like they're cracking their knuckles or praying or something like that, then we could do the same thing, right? So, constraints are there's a lot to them, and I recognize I've just recorded like a 30-minute video, and there's still going to be problems. What I would say is sometimes you have to redo them, right? Like, don't worry about getting them perfect very early on. Worry about getting the animation perfect, and if there's little pops in the constraints and stuff, that is one of the later passes that you do to make those constraints work perfectly, right? But there's no reason to make them work perfectly when you just may change part of the animation and mess them up again. So get them close, and continue to polish the animation, get the constraints working perfectly at the end. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions along the way, feel free to send me an email, contact me, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.